everybody? Welcome back to another episode of How to Get Away with the JD. It's your boy Phelan Simpkins, aka Oliver Pope, and I have another guest with me, of course. But before we get started, I have to wish you guys a happy new year because you are listening to this or watching this on January 1st. So for those of you who are still waiting for grades like myself, good luck. Good luck. But I do have a guest with me, so I'm gonna let him introduce himself and then we're gonna, dive into our topic for the day.
Well, hello everyone. My name is J.R. Swanegan. I serve as the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Missouri School of Law. I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you today. Thank you.
Wait a minute, JR. I didn't know that you were also a part of the Financial Aid Committee. So, money, scholarship, something, maybe?
Yes, future? Sure.
Okay, you all heard it here first. You're my witnesses.
Let's talk.
If I come up broke or not in law school next semester, it's JR's fault. But no, anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. It's actually been pretty fun doing this. This is episode 2. So I have JR here because this is directed to our pre-law students. We want to talk about the myths behind getting into law school.
Sure.
Kind of like really ease that tension because, some schools have like deadlines, some schools are rolling admissions and really figuring out what that looks like for a student, especially those who don't necessarily have an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I went through the process, I'm a non-traditional student, so I was doing this all by myself. I would ask schools, hey, what are your deadlines? Like I would have to really go through the website for those of us who didn't have that, and then for those who do or may not necessarily know how to reach out, this is going to be really for them.
Sure.
And gearing towards that. So what is, in your time, so you work at Mizzou now.
Right.
But before that, you also worked in admissions too.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see anything different between where you used to work and where you currently work in terms of the process when it comes to the applications?
Well, yeah, sure, I think so. So I formerly worked in admissions in the international area. And so that was in some ways very different than JD admissions in that these were students who already had a law degree. In most countries outside of the U.S., students can earn a law degree as an undergraduate degree. And so they were looking to get a master's degree in the U.S. I will say that successful students in both the JD or students looking for a master's degree in the law is one tip that I'd really keep in mind is it's a human process. I think you said that when you talk to people at admissions offices, it's a tip that I would say carry with you. There is always someone behind there is no great Oz in admissions, right? I mean, each law school has an admissions team, typically a dean of admissions or a director of admissions. Each law school typically has its own admissions committee, and I can talk a little bit about those as well. So I think that when you have questions, definitely ask. We field in my office probably dozens of questions each day that really cover a broad area of topics. And I think that if you have the confidence to basically say, I don't know everything, but I need to know more, pick up the phone. Admissions people are generally nice people. They're generally people who like talking with students, want to convince you why our school might be the right fit for you, but also recognizing that different people have different needs. And so there are certain things that can be true of the admissions process across the board that we can assist you with. But the types of questions that you might want to ask at the admissions office are those important dates, like you said. Yes. So when do applications open? When do applications begin being reviewed? At the University of Missouri School of Law, we open our admissions typically on September 1st. And we have rolling admission. And if you're asking yourself, what is rolling admission, right? What rolling admission means that we start looking at applications, and I'll explain the we, but we start looking at applications typically 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month after that September 1st deadline, and we start looking at those applications and reviewing them and making real-time decisions throughout the admissions process. And the typical admissions process for law schools is going to be about a year. You're going to think about law school similar to what your high school experience was. You spent much of your senior year thinking about where you wanted to go to undergrad. It's going to be spending much of your, assuming that you're in undergrad, and I don't want to make that assumption for everyone listening today, but if you are in undergrad, you want to spend a good portion of your senior year thinking about what's going to be the appropriate fit for you in law school. So rolling admissions, when I say we look at that we have an admissions committee here, and most law schools have an admissions committee. They can be made up of a number of different people. Our admissions committee here at Mizzou is made up of 6 faculty members, and I sit in on all of those discussions. We have about 600 applications a year that come in to Mizzou. Our admissions committee, those people look at every single one of those applications. And I'm filibustering, taking too much, but they're looking at all of those applications, and there are a number of different things that they're looking for, and I expect there may be some additional questions about what it is.
There is a little bit later about like what an admissions committee or director is looking for in a student. I know you and I have taken a trip to Chicago recently, and I come from the admissions world before I came back to law school. So working for undergraduate admissions and seeing the JD side of it, it's a lot different in some aspects, but they're still the same. It's still students asking these questions. And a myth that I know surrounds undergrad admissions, so I want to see if it surrounds the law school, or if you've ever heard of this, is that as long as I show up to like events and make myself known, I have a good chance of getting in. Have you ever heard that myth, and like, is it real?
Well, I think it probably leans more closely towards myth, but I mean, I think like many things in the law, there's this gray area between the black and white, right? Yeah. So, the important pieces of your application. Can I talk about those just for a moment? So with almost all law schools, and again, I sort of I'm making some blanket generalizations. With any specific questions you'd have of the law school, you'd want to reach out to that specific law school. Not every law school has rolling admissions, just as one example, but we do. We take the highest LSAT score, and I'll talk about the LSAT for just a moment, but some schools average the scores, some schools take the most recent score. So with everything I'm saying, you want to check with the specific schools that you're interested in to make sure that you get that information. But generally, when an admissions committee or a law school is making a decision on an applicant's file, we're looking at a number of different things. We're looking at your undergraduate GPA, and we can dive into that a little more. We're going to look at your LSAT score. And the LSAT is the law school admissions test. That's the test that is required of almost all law students to be able to enter law school. There are certain law schools that will allow for a GRE as well, but most law schools still look for the LSAT. Letters of recommendation, a resume, and a personal statement. So that is going to be what makes up the sort of crux of your admissions materials. Those are the materials that are going to be reviewed by the admissions committee when they're looking to develop a class that's diverse. And I say diverse in a broad sense. That can be racial and ethnic diversity, that can be gender diversity, that can be geographic location, that can be undergraduate institution or major. But ultimately, the admissions committee is looking to be able to draw a class together of interesting people who will academically challenge one another in class, and the law school legal education experience is one that is pretty dynamic, and there's not a lot of opportunity to be a bystander. You are involved in that educational process. And so I think the admissions committee is thinking, we want to bring a group of people together that we think are going to push each other to be better. And so through the combination of those materials that I just discussed, that is how you paint the picture of who it is that you are. I will say the piece of the puzzle that you just discussed that's not a myth is, if we know you, that can be helpful, right? I mean, if you are someone who scored a 170 on the LSAT, the top score is a 180, and you have a 4.0 GPA, you're going to be able to go wherever you want. But most of us live in a space where that is not where we are. Me too, right? I mean, most of us are not in that position. And so if Mizzou or some other law school happens to be your top choice and you're in the range, right? I mean, like there can be dream schools and there can be reach schools and then there can be safety schools, but there are those schools where it's like, if you know that the fit is right and it's the place you want to be, and you have had a positive experience and multiple conversations with the admissions team, you've visited the institution, maybe you've talked to some faculty members, I think that can add points to the profile. So it's not going to push you across the line if the rest of your materials aren't right. But if it's a tiebreaker, it does matter.
Okay.
I mean, and I'll just say one more thing. I mean, in life, people want to be around people who they like, people who they want to spend some time with, right? And so, if the admissions team's experience, and I'd say, just as a piece of advice, when you go into an admissions office and there's an administrative person that's working with you, be kind to that person. Be kind to anyone you see in the hallway. You don't know who people are, and it's just a good rule of thumb to be kind, but we're a small community here at this law school. We know one another. We recently had a holiday party where we all gathered and broke bread together, and we know, right? I mean, we know the people, we know the students that are those students that it's pleasant to be around, and we know in a small community those students that might not be as pleasant. So I would just say, always err on the side of being kind, being nice, and being someone that someone wants to be around. And that's JR's lesson beyond.
Lesson of life.
Yes.
The more you know. I do find that funny though. So when I was applying to schools, and like I said, I did this on my own. I did my visits to the schools that I could go to. Mm-hmm. Some of my reach schools were a little too far, so the budget wasn't allowing it. But one school in particular, I remember, because it's not too far from home, and I toured, talked to an admissions counselor, sat and talked to maybe like 4 or 5 students like for an hour on accident. And so I was like, okay, I feel pretty confident about the school, put in my application and everything. Mind you, okay, so all of my application material is the same for all the schools I applied to. I gotten denied from a couple of schools, gotten accepted into some schools that ranked above said school. And I remember getting the email from the committee saying that I wasn't accepted, and me at the time, I like to know, because like I have other applications pending. Okay, what was it about my application? So I call and set up a meeting with the person, with the admissions dean, and she was saying that, oh, I really liked you, but I just didn't think you were worth fighting for. And those words have always stuck with me. I mean, I've been accepted in some like really good schools, and obviously I'm here.
Yes.
But those words really bit, because it's like, okay, I've gotten into schools that are higher than yours, and I've gotten into schools that are lower than yours, and some that are vastly the same. So for you to tell me that I don't qualify, or like I'm not worth fighting for, is stinging, especially to a minority student. So what is something, as an admissions dean, what do you think is something for those students who get discouraged during the process? Because like you said, it's a long process. You can submit your applications in September and still wait for a decision to like December, January. So what is something that you would advise for students to keep going despite those pitfalls and discouraging moments?
I mean, I think that I didn't know that about you, and but I say it's life teaches some rude lessons sometimes, and I think that a part of this process is basically just maintaining that belief in yourself, right? And I think that there is a lot of this feeling of what's called imposter syndrome, this feeling that I don't belong, whether it be at the highest level, the most elite school, or whether it be me coming to the University of Missouri and thinking, I don't know how I tricked my way into this place. And I think that you have to have that belief in yourself that you do belong, that you put yourself in a position that you're going to be able to find the appropriate fit, and that this isn't easy, right? I mean, if it were easy, everyone would do it. And so I would say that's my advice is continue to tap into your support system, continue to have that belief in yourself, and you're going to get where you want to go. And you can visit this admissions person 10 years from now and say, maybe you should have fought, right? I mean,
can't wait.
So, right, and I can't either. But I'm really pleased that it ended the way it did. I wanted to add a couple notes though to some of the things you said. So one is you talked about maybe the issue of funding and travel. There are certain institutions, Mizzou again being one of them, but this is another example of reaching out to the offices that do provide travel stipends. So applying to law school can be a really expensive, costly endeavor, and so there are fees associated with LSAC, the organization that administers the LSAT. There's application fees. Piece of advice: call the admissions office, ask them for a fee waiver.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
9 times out of 10 you'll get it, and if they say no, that's okay, because sometimes people say no in life. But if you want to save yourself $50-$60, call the admissions office and say, I'd like to apply to your institution, but I'm applying to a number of schools. On average right now, most law students are applying to 6 different schools. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, like I said, there are these travel stipends that will help to maybe not alleviate all of the cost, but will help to alleviate a significant portion of the cost to be able to visit a law school. And I think it's hugely important as someone that we sometimes, I certainly live in this space where the rankings really matter to students, and sometimes they matter to alumni. And I think rankings are valuable to an extent. I think they can be a good starting point when you're doing your research. But what I would suggest to you is you really need to find the place that feels like it's the appropriate fit for you. It's going to be the place where you're going to spend the next 3 years of your life, maybe more than that if you're doing it at a sort of slower speed. So you want to be comfortable in the place that you're going to be spending your time, where you're going to be building your professional network. Your first day as a lawyer is your first day of law school. I mean, that's when you're building your reputation that's going to follow you throughout your legal career. So I'd say definitely keep those things in mind, but go visit the schools if you can, again, because I think it's really easy to have a glossy view book or a website that looks outstanding, and it's difficult to get the culture of an institution unless you go in and you see, do people say hello to one another in the hallway? Are people friendly to one another? What do the students really have to say? My salary is paid by working to convince students to come here, but if you talk to another student, they're not going to sugarcoat things for you. They're going to tell you exactly how it is. And so, I think we have a wonderful culture here. I think that there are things that we, there are support systems in place, and it's not perfect, but nowhere is. But I think that you definitely can get the sense yourself to, that spider sense can go up to see if something's a right fit or not.
I like what you said, though. Please, dear God, if you all do nothing else, ask the admissions offices for those fee waivers. I sent emails to most of the ones that I applied to, or I called maybe one because it was like playing tag back and forth. And so I was able to get all of those fee waivers, and then all I had to do was pay the LSAC fees, which is still pretty pricey.
It is.
So, but LSAC also has a waiver. It just takes, it's a lot more hurdles to jump through. So, I mean, if you feel so inclined, I got denied, but if you feel so inclined, definitely reach out. There are definitely ways to cut the cost of doing this. That way you can maximize your experience and your benefits. And I really think for somebody who's going to go into a JD, depending on what your undergrad loans look like and your debt, and then also what your experience looks like, you might want something different. So I decided to stick with the institution that I've known since undergrad. I know some friends of mine who left completely from like the PWI world and went to an HBCU because they wanted the HBCU experience, and then vice versa. So depending on what you want, which is a really good point, you really want to go visit those institutions because it makes the difference. Because you think you might want one thing, and then you get there and it's just like, oh, this isn't doing it for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting. Do you remember when you applied to law school?
I do.
What was the most nerve-wracking thing in that process?
I think it probably goes back again to this feeling that I didn't know that I necessarily belonged in law school. So I was late to apply. I mean, when I talk to students about thinking about law school now, I say you want to give yourself as much time as possible. If you can take the LSAT in the summer after your junior year, that's wonderful. And these are all sort of like perfect scenarios that I certainly didn't live by myself, right? I went home at Thanksgiving, my senior year. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I spoke with my father. I was thinking about potentially doing a Master's of Public Administration, but didn't really feel like a fire about that. Just didn't know what I was going to do, and so I thought maybe I'll do that. I was a political science undergraduate, and my dad said, "Why don't you think about law school? You've always been interested in the law." And and at the time, I think it was like the little boost I needed, because I don't think my mind was right to have the sort of confidence necessary at that time to kind of pursue that. So ultimately, I figured out taking the LSAT. I took the LSAT in January, and then it was really just putting the materials together. I did not have perfect grades. I did not have a perfect LSAT score. I had good grades and a decent LSAT score, and I was used to being someone who generally got what they wanted in life. And so I think what was anxiety inducing to me was putting myself out in a way where it was likely I wasn't going to get what I wanted, at least from a couple of these institutions, right? And that did happen to be the case. But ultimately I found, again, the institution that was the right fit for me. But I think that, there's some risk involved. And again, you have to just kind of tap back into that, whatever it is at your core that says, this, I belong and I can do this. And you'll tap into that many, many times through your law school experience. So the process itself of getting there, but it will be one that will sort of, you'll continue to develop along the way.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and I have some listener letters for you from some pre-law students who just have like questions about what should they do and other things. So
great.
We'll get your responses to those.
Wonderful.
And we are back. So there are some listeners who are pre-law students who have submitted questions for you because I gave them the heads up that you would be on today. So one of the first questions I got
I'd like to be a repeat guest, so just
you heard it. You will probably see him again. You will see him
Bring me
again.
back. Yeah.
The first question that we have is from a student. So in the first episode, I talked about Legally Blonde. And I don't know if you've seen Legally Blonde.
I've seen it.
So do you remember the scene with the admissions committee watching the video of Elle?
I don't.
Okay. So the question is evolved around the admissions committee. She would like to know, when it comes to your committee meetings, is it everyone reviewing the application at once and talking about it to make the decision, or is there another process when it comes to reviewing a student's application?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So this would be one of those examples of it's probably dependent on the school, but I can tell you the way it works at our school. So at Mizzou, as the applications come in, I send those applications in batches to the members of the admissions committee, and we have weekly or every other week admissions committee meetings. And they will review all of the applications that they have in advance of those meetings, and then there will be discussion about. So it's not a real-time kind of discussion. They'll make notes about they'll make notes about things that they think are interesting about the file. They'll maybe flag some things that they think that they'd like to discuss. But everyone has seen all of the materials. They reviewed all of the materials, and then there's a sort of group discussion. It's not sort of a vote. It's generally like the committee will either, there might be someone who's fighting strongly for one person and the committee says okay, or it might be that everyone's uniformly agrees, but generally it's a very collegial and cordial kind of environment. But it really goes back to that discussion about like painting the picture of what makes you you.
Okay, which actually brings me into the next question about painting the picture. It's from a male student, and he doesn't have the highest GPA. He's pretty average, and an average LSAT score. And so he wants to know, as an applicant, what can he do to stand out for the universities that he applies to that don't do interviews and things like that?
So I think certainly you want to have a strong personal statement. And the personal statement, you want to take the opportunity to be able to talk about why you're interested in law, talk about why you're interested in that specific law school, or not talk about that at all, but just write an interesting story or narrative about some experience that you've had that's been changing, that's been sort of life-altering or changing for you. What's really important is that the writing sample is, so let me say this, there's no template for a writing sample, at least at Mizzou. If there's a prompt, some schools have a prompt, definitely write to the prompt. We don't have one, so you can write what you want. What the committee is looking for is something that's interesting, something that speaks to them, something that's authentic to your voice, and something that is not full of errors that could have been reviewed by your friend to say, you got to put a comma here, or this is misspelled, right? And definitely what you don't want to do is, like I said earlier in the pod, is students are applying to about 6 different law schools on average each year. You don't want to say, since I read To Kill a Mockingbird in 7th grade, I've always wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew I wanted to do it at law school X, which doesn't happen to be my law school. That might be a great law school, and that's an easy fix on your part, and I'm not mad that you're applying to law school X, but I am mad that you didn't fix it in your personal statement. So make sure that you pay attention to detail. That's a great opportunity for you to be able, like, your LSAT is what it is, your GPA is what it is. Pay attention to those details. And with your resume, that's another opportunity. Have you done some cool things? Have you been involved with community service? Have you started an organization? Do you have a podcast? Have you run a marathon? Did you go on a service learning project over spring break and, dig a well? We are all imperfect candidates. We're all imperfect people. We don't expect perfection. But show us something that says, this is why I'm still interesting, and this is why you still want me to be a part of that class. And those, again, are your opportunities to be able to do that.
Okay. And then the last question comes from a young lady who would like to know, she's just starting the process, what are the major don'ts when it comes to the process of applying to law school?
So definitely the first one that comes to mind is the one I just discussed, having grammatical errors in your materials. That it just, again, shows a lack of attention to detail. Law school and the law are all about details, like diving into the details. And so if our first introduction to you is one where you're talking about a different law school that you want to go to, or you're not appropriately using spell check or using Grammarly or doing things that are relatively basic, having someone look at your materials, that's a don't. I'd say there's a tipping point of law schools love to hear from you. Law schools love to be able to answer your questions. Law schools, and by that I mean the admissions teams and the admissions people, don't become like overly aggressive or creepy, right? I mean, like you can have some questions, but it's like there could be a tipping point to where it becomes too much. I mean, in some ways you do have to let the process play itself out. So again, that's not to say I'm discouraging you from asking questions. I love talking to students about, like, what do you think this might be a good idea for, like, a personal statement? Do you think this might be a good idea to add into my resume? But calling every day to check on your status, like that's not great, right? And so just don't do that.
So that is all the questions. Please don't be a creep. That's all the questions we have for today. So before we wrap, JR, we typically end with some tips. So do you have a tip that you would like to give to the pre-law students, and then also a tip that you would like to give to current law students?
My tip is the same, and it's just formulated as we've been having this discussion. It's just continue to believe in the you that has gotten you to this point. That's my tip. I still have to do it myself. I'm 40 years old, and I still find that I have to tap into believing that I belong and that this is the right thing. So wherever you are along that journey, just know that you're what got you here. Keep believing in that.
All right, guys. Well, that is all we have on How to Get Away with the JD. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, Happy New Year. Make sure you guys stick to those New Year resolutions. Mine is to go to the gym. Probably won't happen, but here we are. All right. See you guys next time.